Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Peace be upon you from wherever you're watching me, from the far east to the far west. I hope all of you are well and living in peaceful conditions. Yesterday, I couldn't make a live streaming because I had to go to my other job and to fulfill my other job's requirements. So I couldn't catch my schedule and make a live streaming for you. Apologies for that. Tomorrow, however, I'm going to interview Dr. Glenn Dizon. I'm sure most of you know him from the Duran. He's a regular host on the Duran, and we are going to do a book review. His last book is going to be published in 2 weeks or in 3 weeks. So we're going to speak about his book, which is about Ukraine and how the Ukraine war has led to a Eurasian multipolar system in today's world. So I'm going to, of course, discuss the premise of his book and challenge some of his thoughts. So if you have any questions, please let me know in the live chat or in the description, not the description, but the comments under the description after the end of this live streaming. I'm very excited about that. It's at tomorrow, Friday, 17 or 5 p.m. Central European time. The last live streaming that I made about Iran and how Iran sent a message to Israel and the United States by striking in Iraq, in Syria, and also in Baluchistan, in Pakistan, and YouTube demonetized video. I don't know why. It's just like I was telling my opinion about it, and they demonetized the video and they tell me it's a sensitive issue. So I'm being very careful of what I say in any ways. I'm not showing any graphic images or any bombing or anything. And despite that, this is happening. And to be honest with you, this is a little bit frustrating for me because I spend so much time preparing for a live streaming. It's not like I just click on the live stream and I go and I tell you things, I work between 4 to 6 hours on every live streaming so that I present you quality content, quality analysis, something that I can also connect the dots together, something that makes sense for me and hopefully for you. So, in order to, let's say, navigate through the suppression of YouTube, please hit the like button on this live streaming at the beginning of this video. And if you can afford, become a patron. The patron is patreon.com/Syriana Analysis, just for me to survive in this jungle. As you can see, there is a lot of suppression and it's going to get worse, by the way. And I'm coming to that at a later stage in this live streaming. So stay tuned for that because worse days are ahead of us. And these elites, the oligarchs, they are trying and attempting all in their all might and power to suppress our voices and to regulate free speech under the banner of misinformation and disinformation. And if you're following the Davos meetings, they say the biggest challenge that humanity faces today is not the climate change, it's not nuclear wars, it is misinformation and disinformation, which means they are going to put so much weight in and so much attention to what we say on these social media platforms. And that's why I think they're coming after our channels and our outlets because we're presenting independent thoughts and we are urging the people to think out of the box and be critical thinkers. Now, in the last live streaming, I spoke about how Iran's strikes, as I mentioned, in Iraq, Syria, and Baluchistan in Pakistan sent a message to Israel and to the United States. And I explained why the United States and how the United States, the historical context, why the United States came after Iran in 53, and then how the Islamic Revolution happened in 79, and how Iran immunized itself against the United States intervention in its domestic affairs, and how Iran has built a network of alliances in the region in a way that it is formidable today. And the United States is not able to wage a direct war like they did in, for example, Iraq or in Yugoslavia or in Vietnam, or even through proxies like they did in Syria, right? It is a very strong country. They are trying to destabilize it from within, not because of the sins that Iran committed, but because of the sins that Iran did not commit. Why Iran is very important for the United States, we have to understand geopolitics. Whoever controls the Eurasian region controls the world. And the three pillars of the Eurasian region is Iran, China, and Russia. And the nightmare for the American empire is that these three countries come closer together. And we can see nowadays, thanks to the policies of the United States, interventionist policies, bullying, and the interventions of the United States in the region, these three countries are coming closer together. And Xi Jinping knows this, Putin knows this. Therefore, they are pursuing better relationship with Iran in order to bring these three countries together, in order to create a formidable region in Eurasia, that these three pillars become allied on the security and strategic levels, and then include Iran under the umbrellas of either the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the BRICS economic bloc. Iran is very important player. Now, the last time, in my opinion, the United States tried to regime change, right, seriously in Iran, was through the Arab Spring. This is something that a lot of people, unfortunately, I'm saying, do not comprehend completely, because I say today I was talking to my friend Vanessa Billy, and I told her, like, so many people say they are pro-Palestine, but they come against the Syrian regime, and against the Iranian regime, and these people are Jaziratized. And the people who are Jaziratized, those who are following Jazeera, and they take all the political opinions and comprehension of these complex issues from Al Jazeera. And Al Jazeera is a very biased outlet against Syria, against Iran. Yes, they claim to be for Palestine, but they try to destabilize the countries that support Palestine and give them tangible support. This is something that, in my opinion, only fifth columns do. In any ways, so through the Arab Spring, the plan of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton was to bring the Muslim Brotherhood to power in Egypt, to bring the Muslim Brotherhood to power in Tunisia, to bring the Muslim Brotherhood to power to Libya, and they managed to do so. And at the final stage, to bring the Muslim Brotherhood to power where? In Syria. And if that happens, the Muslim Brotherhood, when it comes to power, they would have Turkey and Qatar would have a very strong power base in the region, and they would be able to project their power on the entire region through the gate of Syria. And if anyone studied history, we know that the Ottoman Empire expanded in the Arab world, in the Middle East and North Africa, through the gate of Syria. Therefore, they used to call Syria Sham Sharif, the honorable Levant, because through the gate of Syria, they were able to become an empire in the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa. The American planners, they know this. They have geopolitical minds there. They know this, right? So they wanted to bring the Muslim Brotherhood to power. If the Muslim Brotherhood comes to power, and the Muslim Brotherhood is a sectarian, regressive power, they will be working against the Iranian interests in the region. So instead of going directly against Iran, they would come in a tacit way, in an indirect way, through the Muslim Brotherhood organization in the region, and try to destabilize Iran and its influence in the region through the gate of Syria by bringing the Muslim Brotherhood to power. And that's why, unlike any other countries, Iran didn't intervene militarily in other countries, but it did in Syria, right? Because they know if Syria falls in the hands of the Muslim Brotherhood, they're going to be next. And that's why they intervened. And the Russians did the same, because if Syria falls to these Islamists, the next stage will going to be that these Islamists will seek to open gates to Central Asia, right? That's why also one of the reasons why Russia intervened in Syria. Now, the Syrian so-called revolution failed miserably, and the American, let's say, strategy also failed in the region to bring these Islamists to power against the sectarians, let's say, against Iran, and they failed. Now we are in a situation where we have clashes in the Gaza Strip, onslaught against the Palestinians, and there is again a talk about intervention in the region by the Americans and the Iranians, but this time they have a big network of allies in the region, and they are striking against the interests of the Americans. But the Americans, it seems, right, it seems, according to multiple sources, which I'm going to show you today, that they learned that the Americans were trying to prepare hotspots for ISIS and other terrorist organizations in the region, in Iraq, in Pakistan, and in Syria, in order to hit the Iranian assets and the directly Iranian interests in the region. So they woke up to the fact that now it's time to act. This is according to the sources, that now they have to hit against these American planning bases or headquarters, because next step is going to be similar terrorist attacks inside Iran, just like happened 2 weeks ago in Kerman, where over 100 civilians died. So the Americans have two weapons right now against Iran. One is the so-called ISIS, Islamic State, which is a contract army for the United States, of course. And two is through what the women rights. But the women rights doesn't have a big, let's say, base in Iran, so it's failed quickly. And the second one is to force Iran to get busy in an internal conflict with these ISIS cells. So now we have that the situation that the Iranians are faced with, and they see that there is a serious threat against them. And this is an article published by a former Indian diplomat. I always butcher his second name. It's Bahadra Kumar. Okay. And he is a very well, let's say, versed and very well knowledgeable person in the region. So I summarize this article to you as much as I can. It's very, very important for us to understand what's happening and why Iran struck the positions in Pakistan and in Syria and in Iraq. The stunning missile and drone strikes on three countries, Syria, Iraq, and Pakistan, over a period of 24 hours, and Tehran taking the extraordinary step of announcing its responsibility for the attacks, conveyed a very big message to Washington. What is the type of message? It's in green. That is that its stratagem to create that, I'm butchering this word all the time, that its stratagem to create a coalition of terror groups in the region surrounding Iran will be resolutely countered. The China brokered Iran-Saudi rapprochement and the induction Iran, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Egypt into BRICS put the US strategists in panic mode. There were signs already by the latter half of 2023 that the US, with Israeli access, was planning to use terrorism as the only viable means to weaken Iran and restore the regional balance back in favor of Tel Aviv, which is critically important for Washington's prioritization of Asia Pacific and yet need to control oil-rich Middle East. Indeed, a conventional war with Iran is no longer feasible for the US as it risks the potential destruction of Israel. This is what I told you guys about the immunization of Iran, right, against the direct intervention of the US and Israel in their affairs. Therefore, what tools and what cards the US and Israel have there? It is through non conventional ways, indirect ways, and this is how they use the terrorist groups. For example, we have this Mujahideen al Khalaq here, which is mentioned in the article, to conduct terrorist attacks inside the Iranian territories. Tehran is cognizant of the urgent necessity to carve out strategic depth before the walls close in. Tehran has been pressing Moscow to expedite a bilateral strategic pact, but Russians, unsurprisingly, took time over it. One key agenda item during President Ibrahim Raisi's work visit to Moscow on December 7 to meet with President Putin was the finalization of the pact. So now we're not only speaking about alliances, but also we're speaking about military pact between Iran and Russia. And Iran was more excited and interested in striking a pact deal with Russia than the Russians themselves. Russians took longer time, in my opinion, because the Russians know that the Middle East is a fertile ground for competition between different powers, right? And the Russians see themselves as a separate independent power in the region and not part of an Iranian alliance. And this is, for example, why the Russians, before they intervened in 2015 in Syria, they told the Syrians and the Iranians, they said, look, we're here to fight these terrorist groups, but we're not interested in becoming part of your alliance or the axis. You call it an axis of resistance against Israel. So keep me out of this. My business here is to help you to fight against the terrorists, and myself having a strong foothold in the Mediterranean. Whatever happens on the Israeli front, I'm not really interested in it. And the Syrians and the Iranians accepted that. So Russians always, they're suspicious, not suspicious, but they're careful. They don't want to be part of an axis like Syria and Iran. They want to be on the sideline, and that's why they weren't very hurry and didn't find the urgency to strike a pact with Iran. But this is now changing, guys. This is changing. On Monday, so we were speaking about only 3 days ago, finally, the Russian Defense Ministry disclosed in a rare statement that Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu called his Iranian counterpart Mohammad Reza Ashtiani to convey that Moscow has agreed to sign the pact, the Ministry of Defense statement said. So what did this statement say? Quote, both sides stressed their commitment to the fundamental principles of the Russian-Iranian relations, including unconditional respect for each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity, which will be confirmed in the major intergovernmental treaty between Russia and Iran, as this document is being finalized already. I quote, the two ministers also pointed out the importance of issues related to regional security and emphasized that Moscow and Tehran will continue their joint efforts in establishing a multipolar world order and negating the unilateralism of the United States. This is in the pact, guys. Moscow and Tehran, they will continue working and they will continue their joint efforts to establish a multipolar world order and negate the unilateralism of the United States. This is in the pact itself. Like usually when two countries sign a pact or sign a treaty and they aim towards such a goal, they don't literally say in the pact, right? But all the clauses and the articles inside the type of cooperation, the military, the security, the economic, it leads to this goal. But this pact, it mentions that the both sides will work jointly to establish a multipolar world order. And this pact means that the Russians will come and become allies with the Iranians. And in case of a military threat against Iran, both sides will highly likely act together or jointly against mutual threats. And in addition to that, the Chinese are trying to establish similar relationship with the Iranians. And therefore, when in the last live streaming I said that the Iranians will not be satisfied with a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, I really meant it because I truly believe that the direction that the things are heading toward in Iran, in Russia, in China, they're working seriously to kick the American out of the region. Their influence, and also the Saudis know it, and that's why the Saudis they struck a deal with Iran, right? Through the mediation of the Chinese, the Saudis can see and they're detecting the changes on the long run. Therefore, they're also changing their behavior and they're changing their priorities. And in a later stage in this live streaming, I will show you what the foreign minister of the Saudi Arabia said during the Davos conference in the World Economic Forum. No other leader in the World Economic Forum said that ceasefire should lead into a two-state solution. No one said that except for the Saudis. But the Saudis now emboldened, just like the Iranians in the region. Suffice to say, Iran's missile and drone strikes against terrorist targets on Wednesday are a vivid demonstration of its assertiveness to act in self-defense in the neo-regional and international milieu. Iran's so-called proxies, be it Hezbollah and or Houthis, have reached adulthood with a mind of their own, who would decide their own strategic positioning within the axis of resistance. They don't require a life support system from Tehran. It may take some time for the Anglo-Saxon strategists to get used to this new reality, but eventually they will. And this is something that I explained in the last, again, live streaming, that there is a difference between an ally and a proxy. Hezbollah and the Houthis are not the proxies for Iran, or no more proxies of Iran. Maybe at the beginning, but now these two countries have matured, or two players have matured enough, and they have enough resources and capabilities to act independently and create an intersection or find an intersection of interests with the Iranians, so that when the Houthis act and when the Hezbollah acts independently, it doesn't go against the Iranian interests in the region. So this network of alliances that Iran created in the region It serves the interests of the Iranians, but these players can act independently, similar to Syria, similar to Houthis, similar to the Hezbollah in this regard. So, clearly, it is an underestimation to regard Iran's missile and drone strikes as merely counter-terrorist operations, even with regard to the strike on Baluchistan. Interestingly, it took place within a month of COAS General Asim Munir's week-long trip to Washington in mid-December. So this high-ranking general from Pakistan, he was in Washington, D.C. in December for a week-long trip, and he met with senior U.S. officials, including Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, U.S. Forces Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff General Charles Brown, and U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor Jonathan Finner, and of course, the redoubtable Undersecretary of State Victoria Nuland, the driving force behind the Biden administration's neocon policies. If you ask me why the Americans rolled the red carpet to this general, and he met with senior security and Biden administration security and military officials, including the war hawk Victoria Nuland. If you ask me, I would say they were looking for the Saddam Hussein of Pakistan, because Saddam Hussein, I spoke about him in length. He came to power with the facilitation of the Americans in order to fight against the Iranians. And he was a hothead person who waged a war against the Iranians, and both sides lost it. And this is what the Americans are looking in the region. They're not looking for a victory of Pakistan. They're not looking for a victory of any other ally. They want the mutual destruction. And if entire Pakistan is destroyed today and entire Iran is destroyed today, Pakistan is a nuclear power, then it's a win-win situation for the Americans, right? So it seems that the Iranians detected these moves of the Pakistani officer or general in the United States, and they struck in Baluchistan for this reason. Pakistan has an entire history of serving American interests in the region, and the general headquarters in Rawalpindi has been the charioteer of such collaboration. What is on evidence today is that the forthcoming elections in Pakistan didn't discourage the Biden administration from rolling out the red carpet for Munir, but the good part is that both Iran and Pakistan are smart enough to know each other's red lines. US intentions are clear: outflank Tehran in the west and east with failing states that are easy to manipulate. The hastily arranged meeting in Davos between the US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and top US officials or Iraq officials in the downstream of the Iranian strikes underscored. So, what have the Iraqis and the Americans discussed in Davos? Just a second, I need to drink water. So they spoke about the importance of the Kurdistani resuming oil exports to Israel and Washington's support for the Kurdistan region, the strong partnership with the United States. They spoke about the importance of stopping attacks against U.S. personnel in Iraq and Syria. They spoke about the U.S. commitment to enhancing security cooperation as part of a long-term sustainable defense partnership. They spoke about the U.S. support for Iraqi sovereignty and Biden's invitation for Iraqi Prime Minister Sudani, who is a Kurdish, to visit the White House soon. In a nutshell, Sullivan has voiced the U.S. intentions to strengthen its presence in Iraq, and it has similar objectives to pursue in Pakistan too. Washington trusts Munir to ensure that Imran Khan languishes in jail no matter the outcome of the Pakistani elections. This strategic realignment comes at a time when Afghanistan has conclusively slipped out of the Anglo-American orbit, and Saudi Arabia shows no interest to be a cog in the American wheel or dabble with the forces of extremism and terrorism. Now, this is what the Indian former diplomat said in this regard. Now, if we want to connect the dots and see some other source about the same topic and to put it in a proper context, Muhammad Marandi, he was our guest again. He was on Al Jazeera yesterday, and he said this. Let's first listen to him, what he said here, and we will see how similar the intervention or the opinion of Muhammad Marandi is compared to the opinion of the former Indian diplomat.
Well, the story is that after the war in Gaza and when things began to go downhill for the Israeli regime, they started activating terrorist organizations both in Iraqi Kurdistan and in the sort of no man's land in Pakistani Baluchistan. The Pakistani government has problems with that area and in controlling that area. And right now, there are large numbers of Pakistanis who are in Iran because of the economic situation, so near the border with Pakistan. So the Iranians discovered that a major operation, a major attack, terrorist attack was about to occur. And we've had an increase in terrorist attacks, as you know, from that area in Pakistan inside Iran, where we had lots of casualties. So the Iranians felt that they had to strike immediately because something bad was expected to happen. Now, obviously, the Iranians didn't want to do this because they have excellent relations with Pakistan, and the economic relationship is to expand. The president has a special focus on that. But there's a big problem on the border as we speak, and it is being manipulated by the Israelis.
So this is according to Professor Mohammad Marandi, who advised the Iranian government that on the borders between Iran and Pakistan and the Baluchistan area, the Americans and the Israelis are preparing hotspots for the terrorists. And if they manage to do so, if this is correct, then Iran will be engaged in a war with these extremists, right? And similarly, they are doing similar thing in Iraq, or from Iraq, in the northern part, in Kurdistan, where the Mossad and the US have a stronghold there, and they navigate and they work there freely, like they feel like they're home, right, in the Kurdistan area. So we have a person in Pakistan like Asim Munir, and he was in Washington D.C. Meeting with all these officials from the Biden administration. So 1 month later, the Iranians, it seems that they felt the danger and they struck in Pakistan, in Baluchistan. And similarly in Iraq, because as you remember, the Indian former diplomat said that they're looking for their guy also in Iraq. And now in Iraq, we have a prime minister who was in Davos, and see how he reacted to the attack in Iraq. This is Iraqi foreign minister reacts to the Iranian missile strike in Erbil with an exceptionally strong condemnation. He says Iran doesn't want or cannot attack Israel, so they are searching for victims around them and they're attacking Erbil.
Unfortunately, the tension between Washington and Tehran usually when there is tension between these two countries, the Iraqis are paying the price, and the fight is going on Iraqi soil. And now the tension between Israelis and the Iranian also is the same. That's why the Iranian, they don't want or they cannot attack Israel. Then they are searching for victims around them, so they are attacking Erbil.
What can Iraq do at this point? What's your response?
In the first place, we are condemning these attacks, and we consider it as an aggression and against international law, violation of international law. So we took various measures, and we are going also to Security Council in New York.
What do you think the UN Security Council will achieve?
I think there will be a huge support for Iraqi position against Iran. Iran is in fact isolated from the world. So if Iraq is going to Security Council and Iraq has been considered as an ally to Iran, then it will create huge problem inside.
Okay, I'm not defending Iran here. I just want to compare his language to the language of the American and European officials when they say Russia is isolated from the rest of the world. You know, Iran is isolated from the rest of the world. The rest of the world is AKA the 27, 28 countries in the European Union, United States, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and South Korea. I don't know, maybe Taiwan. I mean, this is the rest of the world for them, right? And to be honest with you, the Iranian attack on Iraq, it's a violation of the sovereignty of Iraq. I truly accept that. But when the current government in Iraq doesn't do anything about the violation of its sovereignty from the Turkish side is conducting daily attacks on the Iraqi borders. They occupy territories inside Iraq at the current moment, inside sovereign Iraqi territories. But they will take this issue to the UN Security Council. It shows you the intentions, right? It shows you where is this heading to. And if they go to this UN Security Council, I truly do not think that the Russians and the Iranians will let this resolution, if they are calling for any sort of resolution, to pass by. I think the Russians and the Chinese will veto it. The rules-based order, quote unquote, has shown us that we're living in a jungle. And the Chinese and the Russians, they have tried a lot to be on the side of international law. They let the intervention in Libya under the responsibility for protect. And they allowed lots of things, for example, sanctioning Iran in the past. And they've seen that this is just in service of the US empire. Therefore, I think through the lessons that the Chinese and the Russians learned and how much they are emboldened nowadays after the Ukraine war and how the Chinese are treating the Americans in different files, especially hotspots around the world, I don't think, just this is my opinion, I may be correct, I may be wrong, that the Russians and the Chinese will allow this to happen. Now, one other major issue that we are facing today, or the world is faced today, is what is happening in the Red Sea, right? And even now, the authors in the Financial Times, they say that the world cannot depend on the US to keep trade peace. So the US is losing its respect and the credibility and the trust of not only the citizens of the world, but also the quote unquote pundits who write for mainstream outlets, for example, the Financial Times. And Alan Beatty, he says the following here. This brings us to events in the Red Sea, he says. The Houthis are not a bunch of scruffy thieves in motorbikes. They are ideologically motivated militants with land based backed by a powerful state, Iran. They can inflict damage remotely through missiles and drones and are prepared to take heavy losses themselves. Their attacks are dealing a serious blow to global trade by reducing Suez Canal traffic. And few countries inside or outside the region are fans of them, but there is a sense that the Houthis probably wouldn't be attacking ships had the US not provided such support to Israel during its assault on Gaza. As such, given the widespread international condemnation of Israel's tactics, the US has relatively few reliable allies prepared to join a shooting war. So the US has Britain on its side with little power. The Australians are saying, we're with you. We give you logistical support. Bahrain, sorry, but Bahrain doesn't have any political weight in the region. Who else is joining this? I don't know. Pepe Escobar says that the Europeans are trying to form an alliance. I don't think they will manage to do any major change in this regard. And the Houthis are determined. And yesterday or 2 days ago, when I said a power and a small power like the Houthis in the region, and a poor country like Yemen is challenging the United States, and they say you're not going to prevail. This is the psychological conditions in the region nowadays. And even these allies of the US, Saudi Arabia, UAE, they're not joining the alliance against the Houthis, although the Emiratis and the Saudis fought against the Houthis for many years. And they know that the Americans have used them in this conflict. So, the US's initial strikes on the Houthis also involved the UK, plus non-operational support from long-standing allies Australia, Canada, and the Netherlands. But Bahrain was the sole contributor from the Middle East. The EU and other European countries say they will help, but mainly with support and escort operations. China and India, which both have clear commercial interests in keeping the canal open, are not militarily involved. It's Egypt, above all, which is suffering. Its revenues from canal transfer fees, a major source of foreign exchange, are down 40% this year, but it daren't publicly join an offensive against militants who declare support for the Palestinian cause. I mean, the Egyptians are very careful in this regard. The public mood in Egypt is very pro-Palestinian, and they see Egypt is not doing enough in the Gaza Strip. And joining an alliance against the Houthis and the Yemenis, who say that they're doing this for Palestine, it's going to be a major blow to the credibility of and the popularity of the Sisi government. This is just in my opinion. And secondly, as I mentioned in the last live streaming, the Houthis can come and say, "Oh, we are just implementing and following the Genocide Convention, which says we have to prevent genocide. And our measures is to prevent genocide or trying to stop it in the Gaza Strip," right? So in other words, the US military is trying to keep a trade route open, but it's motivated more by geopolitics than by direct economic interest. US trade relies more on the Panama Canal than on Suez, and its gang of allies is accordingly limited. Such motives are worryingly also affected by political change in Washington. Protecting Europe from Russia and backing Taiwan against China have been consensus US policy for decades. But as with so many security issues, another presidential term for Donald Trump might see this change. Trump has said he will withhold US backing for Ukraine, a move which will undoubtedly embolden China. And his isolationist instincts plus resentment at Taiwan supposedly taking semiconductor business from the US might encourage him to withdraw US support for Taipei. This could be catastrophic for the trading system, even more so than Trump's protectionism. Anyways, this is a type of article that I wanted to show you that the US credibility and the image in front of the world is falling, and not in front of the global citizens, but also in the eyes of many in the pundits world, where those people who are experts and they write for major outlets, etc., etc. Guys, before I continue this live streaming, we're around 400 people watching this live streaming. I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button to help this channel grow and this content to be viewed by so many other people than yourself. And now the Americans come and say they're going to designate the Houthis again as a terrorist group. They designated the Houthis in the past as a terrorist group, and then they removed it from the terrorist group, and now they are bringing the Houthis back in the terrorist club again.
Earlier today, the Secretary of State announced the designation of the Houthis as a specially designated global terrorist, effective February 16th, for threatening the security of the United States. Since November, the Houthis have launched numerous missiles and drones towards international merchant ships, as well as U.S. and partner naval vessels defending the safety and security of commercial shipping across the Red Sea. These attacks against international shipping have endangered mariners and disrupted the free flow of commerce and freedom of navigation. For the past several weeks, the United States, with allies and partners around the world, has made clear that there must be consequences for those attacks. And today's designation follows on our military action last week to hold the Houthis accountable for their actions. As always, we are working to mitigate any adverse impacts of this designation on the people of Yemen, including through the issuance of 5 general licenses by the Treasury Department designed to ensure that food, fuel, critical humanitarian aid, and essential commercial goods are able to continue flowing to vulnerable Yemeni civilians. The United States is the world's leading donor of humanitarian assistance to Yemen. We recognize the grave humanitarian situation there, which is why we are taking these steps to minimize harm to the civilian population. At the same time, we will continue to make clear to the Houthis that their attacks against commercial vessels must stop, and we will remain prepared to take additional actions if necessary.
They're prepared to take additional steps if necessary. What kind of other steps can the United States take than bombing Yemen, right? They can bomb Yemen. And will that help the humanitarian situation in Yemen? Of course not. They have tried that for many years. 8 years they've been bombing Yemen. All the weapons that were falling over the heads of the Yemenis, which caused the humanitarian disaster at the first place, were American weapons. They gave it to the Saudis, they gave it to the Emiratis, and they were dropping over the Yemenis, right? How did the situation happen? I mean, can they put the mirror in front of their faces before they give such a speech or give such a statement? I mean, I don't know much about the Houthis or the Ansarullah, right? But what I can see here are the facts. The facts indicate and say that the Houthis, they were targeting and calling on the international cargo ships who were heading to Israel to not come, right? And they didn't target any other vessels. They just said, if you're going to Israel, we're not going to let you because there is genocide happening there. And the Americans, instead of coming and telling the Israelis to stop the atrocities in the Gaza Strip, have you seen the video today? They blew up another university in Gaza. Why are they blowing up universities in Gaza? Why are they blowing up the cultural sites? Why are they blowing up every hospital, school, civilian infrastructure? Because they want to erase the Palestinian presence in the Gaza Strip. This is an ethnic cleansing and the genocide, what's happening in the Gaza Strip, right? And it's not me saying it. I mean, all the legal experts who are impartial and not American or Zionist, they agree on the same thing. And their powers, like the United States, are complicit in this, right? And the Yemenis are saying, we want to stop this, make a ceasefire, strike a ceasefire agreement, and then we allow the Israeli cargo ships to flow again freely. They didn't target American cargo ships or British cargo ships, but the Americans came and they bombed Yemen. So the Houthis said, okay, now we're going to strike the American cargo ships. This is, I think, something that they wanted. They wanted for their cargo ships to be hit after targeting Yemen because they knew what the consequence is going to be, so that they would have an excuse to put them on a terrorist list and then come and bomb Yemen. So they're just trying to turn off fire with fire. This is the only thing that the Americans know. Every problem, because every problem they see it as a nail. So the only thing they have is a hammer. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. This is not a foreign policy. This is not a diplomacy. This is not something that is sustainable. This just shows the American establishment cannot and will not pursue any non-aggressive means to solve the problems in the region, or their diplomacy is failed, ineffective, because nobody wants to join them in negotiations if the Americans can, at the last moment, either stop the negotiations or do not implement the agreements, or simply say, I'm no more interested in this treaty, like the nuclear deal with the Iranians. They just shot themselves in the leg so many times that nobody respects them anymore and nobody believes in their intentions anymore. And this is Amal Saad. She's an expert on Hezbollah and Iranian affairs. She says the following, and she's correct. She says the designation of Ansarullah as a global terrorist group finalizes the U.S. effort to transform the resistance axis into a Bush-inspired axis of terror. Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Popular Mobilization Unit groups are labeled foreign terrorist organizations, while Iran and Syria are state sponsors of terror. The implications of this mass criminalization aren't merely semantic, but contribute to the economic strangulation of these countries. It also means that the possibility of conflict resolution is extremely slim, given that the US doesn't negotiate with terrorists. So yeah, you designate the Ansarullah as a terrorist, and then you say Ansarullah is a proxy of Iran, and now Iran is a financer of terrorist group in Yemen, according to your definition, right? And who are the allies of the Ansarullah in the region? All of them are complicit with terrorism. So you will not negotiate with them, and you will not strike deals with them, and you will not resort to diplomacy with them. And if there is no negotiations and diplomacy, what's the alternative for it, right? It's war. It's war. What is the alternative? So we're heading to dangerous times, like it feels like 2001 and 2003 again in the Middle East. Just when we had a little bit of peace in the region, right? After the Iranian and the Saudis agreed through the mediation of the Chinese, when the regime change war has failed in Syria, people started to breathe again. And now the Americans are like, they cannot, their empire is based on blood, right? this empire is based on blood, and if they cannot spill blood, they will not sustain. This is so ridiculous. Millions of people already perished because of the American wars. It's enough, you know. And now we have someone like Devin Cameron. He comes and he compares Russia to. He says. It feels like the 1930s again, and evil Putin can't win in Ukraine. And he compares him to Hitler, and then he says that he has an empathy to the Palestinian casualties in the Gaza Strip, and his heart is, those are also human beings, and he's feeling for the pain and the suffering, but he's against ceasefire, you know, and this is becoming like. You're not then sympathetic with the Palestinians. If you're sympathetic with the Palestinians, you would try to end the suffering of the Palestinians, right? And David Cameron is another stooge for the establishment. He was one of the instigators of the regime change war in Syria and Assad must go charade. It's ridiculous, man. Yes, if you're empathizing or you have any empathy to the Palestinians, then you have to call for a ceasefire. But you're bombing Yemen instead, that is trying to end this carnage in Palestine, which gives me the impression that you're not empathetic with the Palestinians. You're just the opposite. And as I told you, the Saudis were in the World Economic Forum in Davos, and they were the only ones who called for a peace and a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip.
I think what's important to note here is that there is general agreement. What we need to do is translate that agreement into concrete action. Minister Baerbock very eloquently discussed the fact that peace and security for Israel is intimately linked with peace and security for the Palestinians. And that's something that we have supported in the kingdom since 1981, the phase proposal on peace. So we are fully on board with that. We agree that regional peace includes peace for Israel, but that can only happen through peace for the Palestinians through a Palestinian state. And I hear from Senator Coons exactly the same sentiment. And this is something that we have been indeed working on with the administration, the US administration. And it continues. I think it's even more relevant in the context of Gaza. The fact is that what Israel is doing now is putting the prospects for regional peace and security at risk. There is a pathway towards a much better future for the region, for the Palestinians, and for Israel. That is peace. And we are fully committed to that. But again, the first step for that is ceasefire. And I will say that a ceasefire, of course, means ceasefire on all sides. But that can only happen as should be a starting point towards a permanent, sustainable peace, which can only happen through true justice for the Palestinian people.
What is so controversial in this statement? Why the American and the British and the German officials aren't calling for a ceasefire and the peace and the two-state solution? Why? Baerbock was sitting next to him and she was agreeing with like, yeah, we need peace, we need ceasefire, until he said, until he said that the Israeli attitude or the policy in the Gaza Strip is risking the peace agreement, and she stopped doing any face expressions, right? I have read today a brilliant article about this case, and I totally agree with him. His name is Saul Takahashi. He is a professor of human rights and peace studies at Osaka Yogakuin University in Osaka, Japan. And he says the following. I totally agree with him. He says, no matter how it concludes, South Africa's lawsuit in the International Court of Justice arguing Israel has violated the Genocide Convention will go down in history. It will either be remembered as a first step toward finally holding a rogue state accountable for repeated, long-standing violations of international law, or as the last dying breath of a dysfunctional Western-led international system. For the hypocrisy of Western governments and the Western political elite as a whole has finally brought the so-called rules-based order they purport to lead to the point of no return. Full-throated Western support for Israel's genocide rampage in Gaza has truly exposed the double standards of the West, with regards to human rights and international law. There is no turning back, and the West has only its own arrogance to blame. Desperate to regain some semblance of credibility, Western governments, including the US, have recently started to marginally critical of Israeli attacks. However, it is too late and too little. Western credibility has been shredded irrevocably. Of course, Western hypocrisy is nothing new. According to Western governments, the world should be up in arms about Russian aggression, but should be perfectly happy with Israeli brutality and flouting of international norms. Ukrainians who throw Molotov cocktails at Russian occupation forces are heroes and freedom fighters, while Palestinians and others who dare to speak out against Israeli apartheid are terrorists. International justice has become a sick joke. Were the International Criminal Court ICC functioning effectively, Israeli leaders would be on trial even as we speak, and there would have been no need for South Africa to approach the International Court of Justice. Even if the ICJ issues a provisional order for Israel to halt its violence, and even if years later it finds Israel guilty of genocide without any enforcement, Israel can and probably will simply ignore those decisions. That would surely be the end of the current world order, as any facade of fairness would collapse. Enforcement of international law is in the hands of the UN Security Council, but with its veto rights for the 5 countries that happened to be on the winning side in 1945, that body has time and time again proven itself incapable of fulfilling its mandate. The General Assembly lacks any enforcement power. Israeli aggression and colonization must stop, and abusers of human rights in Palestine must be held accountable, including Western leaders who are complicit in genocide. However, we must not stop there. We must demand a revolutionary reform of international institutions. They must be made truly democratic and egalitarian. They must reflect the voice of the people through civil society organizations and other democratic modes of representation, not governments that are too often in the pocket of rich and powerful interests. Look, I agree with him on this case. However, I would like to tell you that the alternative for the UN at the moment, those who are trying to present themselves as an alternative, is the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum of Klaus Schwab and all these rich billionaires and the certain political elites from certain countries are the ones who are presenting themselves as an alternative to the current world order. And this is not an alternative. The people who have invested interest, the people who have private interest, the people who have financial interest, and weaponizing their finances, which is something logical and any rich people would do to buy influence, political influence, especially after the pandemic that happened in 2020, it shows us clearly that these people will not be any different, maybe even worse, than the current political international establishment. And therefore, I'm very, very wary of these people when they speak about misinformation and disinformation. And this is what I'm going to show you. For example, I told you that, look, people like us, they are they're trying to activate the critical thinking of the people. I'm not saying we're giving you the entire truth, but we are showing you both sides of the story, or the other side of the story that is hidden from the people. And that's why we are considered danger, because the narrative control is very important for any establishment, whether it's regional, whether it's international, whether it's individual, whatever is the case. If the person who is projecting power and is aiming for control loses the narrative, then the image and the credibility of this power to be a superior, to be a hegemon, also fades away. And that is why nowadays we see, in the era of digital media, in the era of citizen journalism, like myself, we are a threat to the narrative. And because of the newer generation are not even turning on their TVs to watch the CNN, Fox News, and all the bullshit TV channels, and they are relying on citizen journalists, this situation is very dangerous for the people who are in charge. And that is why they're trying to regulate free speech and regulate information, and they call it misinformation and disinformation. But the question is, who defines misinformation? If the person in power defines misinformation and disinformation, then this is going to be an abuse of power, right? If I'm in power and I define what is misinformation and disinformation, and I tell you this is I'm the one who is going to tell you what's the truth. Would you really believe that the person who is in charge and has all these powers will tell you the truth? I mean, at home, if you're a father and in charge of 3 kids or 2 kids, you would lie probably 10 times per day to manipulate your kids about certain things. Imagine those who are at so much of a higher place and they have an opportunity and the periphery for huge corruption and money laundering and making money and projecting power over the rest of the population. Imagine that these people will tell you what is the truth and what is the disinformation. And that's why nowadays we have people in the EU, unelected officials, come and speak about misinformation and disinformation like this is the biggest threat that is to the world. Look what this woman has to say in this regard.
For the global business community, the top concern for the next 2 years is not conflict or climate. It is disinformation and misinformation, followed closely by polarization within our societies. These risks are serious because they limit our ability to tackle the big global challenges we are facing. Changes in our climate and our geopolitical climate, shifts in our demography and in our technology, spiraling regional conflicts and intensified geopolitical competition and their impacts on supply chains. The sobering reality is that we are once again competing more intensely across countries than we have in several decades. And this makes the theme of this year's Davos meeting even more relevant: rebuilding trust. This is not a time for conflicts or polarization. This is a time to build trust. This is a time to drive global collaboration more than ever before. This requires immediate and structural responses to match the size of the global challenges. I believe it can be done.
I believe it can be done. Guys, this is surreal. Yeah, if you believe in misinformation and disinformation that I'm spreading on this channel, I encourage you to hit the like button and share this video with your friends. Yeah, please hit the like button before leaving this live streaming. I would really appreciate that. And become a patron since my channel is becoming demonetized. Many of the content, the link is scrolling on the screen, patreon.com/Syriana Analysis. I really appreciate you guys for tuning in. Tomorrow at 5 p.m. Central European time, I'm going to be with Dr. Glenn Deason. We're going to discuss his book, and we will see how the Ukraine war has paved the way for a Eurasian multipolar world. So subscribe and also hit the notification button so you don't miss it, and I will see you tomorrow. Salam.